Welcome to Network Automation Heroes, where we speak to innovators, people doing exciting things in the world of network automation around the NetBox community. And today we have with us Wyatt Sullivan. Wyatt Sullivan's from Itential, one of our partners, but today we're going to be talking about a different tool. We'll get into all of that a little bit later on. Hey, Wyatt, how's it going?
Hey, Mark. Doing good yourself?
I am doing great. Yeah, we've been working on this idea for a little while, and it's got really polished now. So I'm looking forward to showing it off today.
Yeah. This is exciting stuff we've got going on here, and I really like how it integrates and works together.
Yeah, 100%. And people are probably sick of seeing my face by now, but they won't know who you are. So maybe you could give us a quick introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I've been doing this for about 25 years now, so I don't know how quick it's going to be. My name's Wyatt Sullivan. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Itential. That's the title I go by today. I've been everywhere from a consultant to a network engineer, data center manager, product manager. I was in the early days of Arista, CCIE 18027. So if you want to talk Cisco networking, I'm your guy. And currently I'm now here at Itential, focusing and working with the Torero products and the other products that commercial products that go around it. So happy to be here and really excited to tell you about Torero.
So we're going to take a look at the agenda for today so you know what's coming up. As you'll know, if you've seen these before, we like to start with a big high-level problem and see how this relates to you and your network automation initiatives. We've just done the welcomes and the introductions, and today the problem we're going to be looking at is network automation having false starts, or false summits, I should say. So, thinking you're done when you're not really done, but we'll dive into that in a minute. And then we'll have a look at Torero and how it can help. So on network automation has false summits. Wyatt and I had a chat about this beforehand, and we thought it was a really good kind of analogy for that sense that people can get where they're like, gung-ho, let's go do automation. And then there's a problem, and then there's another problem, and then there's another problem. Does this resonate, Wyatt?
In our world, this happens all the time. And it's also kind of as you dive in, you find out there's another thing under the blanket that you have to find and you have to fix, or you find out that you've gotten somewhere and you thought that was great and you realize it's not. Your executive, your CIO says you want to do something a little bit different, or now we're implementing a new thing. You're constantly hitting some false summit of one another as you're going through and building out your automations. It's absolutely something that happens. I see happening quite a bit.
Cool. And we're going to look at like some really specific, we're going to look at some numbers, and we look at a few patterns that we see here that are specific to where Torero helps on this topic as we go through. But just to help everyone kind of align themselves or find themselves in this story, I'm going to go through a couple of slides first that we use a lot at NetBox Labs. They really just talk about the journey that people go through kind of when they're adopting NetBox, but really a lot of the time they're adopting NetBox so that they can do automation. And it's super relevant to this conversation. The first one's this one. Now, like I said earlier, we're going to start high level, we're going to get really specific, and this is pretty high level. But what we talk about a lot with NetBox community and with our customers is this idea of there being like three main stages that people go through when they're adopting a source of truth to be able to do automation with tools like Itential and Torero. The first one's document. And a lot of the time for us, we like to say NetBox's biggest competition, Excel. Like you sure you understand your network, but it's in a spreadsheet that may or may not be up to date, or it's on a wiki somewhere, or it's in someone's head, or it's in the network itself. Like
I don't know how many Excel spreadsheets I've had and put together for documenting IP addresses or VRFs or any VXLANs, any number of things, and sharing spreadsheets and Google Docs. Yeah, that's absolutely where we all started and where we all want to get away from.
Right. And the thing about this is that there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like spreadsheets are the Swiss Army knife of organizing data and sharing it with other people, and it makes perfect sense. But I think what a lot of people are seeing is, the networks are getting bigger. Maybe they're getting more complex. Maybe they're being asked to change them more often. And often they're being asked to do all of this with, the same resources. Yep. So these like practices that we had before, they're not really scaling anymore. And typically this is where you say, right, let's get everything organized. Let's get it into a place like NetBox where we kind of understand what's going on. But the second step comes from there, which is modeling. So, Wyatt and I were discussing this in one of our pre-briefs, and you know, networks have a lot of moving parts, right? It's not just the devices. You could have devices that are controlled or accessible through a controller, like Juniper Mist. You could have devices that aren't really directly related to the network, like something in vCenter. You've got all these other tools like ServiceNow and monitoring. And well, you know this better than I do, but there's a lot going on in here. So it's not just what's the network, but it's also how does that model of the network kind of connect into all these other systems.
It's interesting because it is absolutely a second step in the process, but from an automation engineer, man, I like to, or from a network engineer perspective, I really like to skip that step. I really want to go from documentation to automation, and and then screw myself later because I didn't have any model or any consistency back in. There's definitely a lot of skipping and pretending that this step doesn't exist, uh, because modeling is not intrinsically in my nature, right? That seems more of a that seems more of a programmer's perspective or something like that, or maybe an API engineer or something along those lines. So, man, how do you bridge that gap? How do you make it actually step two instead of step 3.2 or something like that?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. And I think you make a good point about the natural, like, I guess it's like the natural skill set and the natural instincts of people when they start automating. One of the things that we hear a lot is, certainly people coming from spreadsheets to use NetBox, but then also, companies that don't yet have a source of truth. They've started doing automation, and guess what? Everyone's made their own data model, and that data model is now Ansible inventories on laptops. It's
Yep.
CSV files. It's reading from Google Sheets. I've seen it all.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
All right, and then we get through the model stage and we get to automate. And I'm not going to say too much about that because we've got Wyatt here, and this is what the guys over there do day in, day out, and we're going to see some really interesting stuff. But I do want to call out, the stats down at the bottom here. These stats come from a survey that was done by Seamus McGillicuddy over at Enterprise Management Associates. He does a ton of really good research in this area. And if you're looking at this and thinking, well, I'm really only at the beginning, you're not alone. Turns out 72% of respondents find themselves still trying to document, still trying to model their networks.
I would question that too, and maybe premise it on the false summit concept, right? Like, I think everybody wants to be AWS or one of the fangs out there and have everything automatically just work. And I think the people that say that they've fully executed their network automation strategy, like, I bet they're at a false summit. I bet they're somewhere where they say, "Man, I'm good," and they're going to find out, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later that they've started moving their services over to the cloud, or they're repatriating and bringing it back from the cloud, or something along those lines. I feel like they're probably not really there. I think you could probably sit in AWS and see conversations, and they wouldn't even say that they've fully executed their networking automation strategy.
I would agree with that. I mean, I came from the cloud native world, and I don't remember a project ever ending.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And that's one of those mindset shifts that you guys probably you deal with all the time, which is, like, my really simplistic way of saying it is it's moving from thinking I'm going to buy this and then it's going to be done to this is a thing that I do now, right? Like this is a like a skill set that I have and
We
that I constantly hone.
we call it moving from a consumer ideology to a producer ideology.
Mm.
And it's this concept of, I'm a consumer. I'm going to pull whatever tools I want, whatever services I want to do the thing for me. And instead of that, I've got to move to a producer mentality, which is I'm going to pull the tools I want. I'm going to do the things I need for other people, for other departments, for other environments, so that they can get the thing done that they want to. And when you do that, when you move from that consumer to the producer mentality, you absolutely get into that mindset you're talking about, which is I've got to keep up this working environment, and it's got to work, in some sort of SLA, in some sort of time frame. And I am now in a constant state of change and a constant state of updating and making things better.
That makes sense. And really, that like part of this should be familiar to networking teams already because they already have users and they already get tickets coming in by
Yep.
the hundreds or thousands
Yep.
every day, and they're
Yep.
never going away. And really, it's not about adopting automation so that that stops. Right? It's using automation so that that's better, right? And it continues to evolve.
Yeah, it's a mindset. It's not a change in what you do or who you are. It's a change in the mindset, and that changes your focus, not necessarily what you produce, but how you focus on and what you spend your time on.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take another look at this. Many people who watch Network Automation Heroes have seen this very often, but it's the reference architecture. And actually, we put this reference architecture together with the community, with our partners, and it's high level on purpose, right? We were asking ourselves, what does I guess like two constraints, like what does good look like when we see people doing network automation? And then the other constraint is how can we tell this story at a super high level, like one slide kind of thing? Because obviously it's complex. It's
A lot.
complex. And we came up with this. I believe Itential were involved. I think Chris was involved. And what it's really representing here is like if you look back here and say, well, what do we mean by automate? Well, actually, we mean a lot of things, and you've got to start somewhere. But what we notice is that when people are really starting to get value out of their automation, it tends to look like this closed loop, intent-based automation kind of solution. And what you'll see in here is that there's very much a choose your own adventure kind of approach when
Hmm.
it comes to tooling. We really wanted to make this, tooling agnostic as far as possible and just show the general pattern. And I just want to call a couple of those patterns out, and then I'd love to dive into the automation bit with you a little bit more because you guys also have a very kind of tooling agnostic, like a part of the
Yeah.
value prop is
Yep.
works with everything, right? So
Yep.
maybe I'll just start over here and introduce a couple of the concepts. If we look down at the bottom, we've got operations, right? This is the people doing the work. Right at the top, you've got the network. And over on the left, you've got observability and assurance, which for a lot of people is monitoring. And when we meet a lot of organizations that are just starting on this journey, typically that's what they've got, right? They're getting tickets. They've got network engineers. Those network engineers manually update the network through the SSH, and then there's some monitoring somewhere in there that's hopefully telling them that things are broken. And that's kind of where they start, right? They've got a version of about 40% of this picture. And then quickly what starts happening is that, well, we don't really know, like one of the stories is, okay, so we SSH into a device and we find things there that we didn't expect. So now this change that I was expecting to take this afternoon is going to take a lot longer because it turns out that somebody went and made a bunch of changes. Like somebody touched some ACLs and now I'm immediately on DEFCON 1. Like I don't want to touch those ACLs if they look weird because I don't know what else it's going to affect. So we're missing documentation. We don't know what the network should look like.
You want to pull your hair out whenever you go log into a router or firewall or something like that. And there's been some major change that you weren't involved in, which is fine. I wasn't involved in it, but it totally messes up what I was going to do because it happened the night before, something like that. It's just, it's a pain. Or someone did something stupid, which, the number of times I've done it, first of all, is plenty. But the number of times other people have done it right before I made a change, it's like, you can't do that. Like, that's not going to work. That's going to block something, just a mess when you don't have an organized way to do things.
Yeah, and it's this kind of like stepping on eggshells feeling that causes a lot of people to say, right, we actually need proper documentation now. Now,
Yep.
over on the left, we're kind of like to make the diagram work, we kind of need to shove two things into one. So one is observability, right, which is monitoring, and you can get super fancy with that stuff. But then there's also assurance. And really what this looks like on day one is, well, we kind of need to get everything into NetBox because what we're doing the whole time is we're asking ourselves, is what's in the network still what we think is in the network? That's kind of the key here. I'm not going to go into all the details there, but what you'll see is, all sorts of options in terms of vendors all over here. Once you have that, typically what starts happening is people, are encouraged to, sometimes forcefully, update NetBox first, right? So the idea is don't do the fun stuff and then maybe do the documentation. Do the documentation and then go do the fun stuff. And the reason why this is important is because when we get over to the automation side, what's the automation based on? It's based on what we want the network to be, right? So it's a gradual process. Yeah.
It's Interesting. We're adopting a lot of things that good development practices have done for a long time. So we're not creating anything new or coming up with any new ideas. We're just learning from people who have gone before us and done things before us. And there is nothing worse than really good code that has no documentation whatsoever. And there's nothing better than really good documentation and marginal code. Like if you have good documentation on it and you can use it, it's amazing. If you don't have good documentation, can't use it and doesn't matter how good it is. And so we're having to learn that same lesson in the network.
Yeah, Wyatt and I were just discussing this actually in one of the pre-briefs, and my career has been like I started like games, so let's say front end, and then I went to back end, and then I went to DevOps, and then I went to cloud, and then now I'm down here, and I've basically followed this waterfall of doing this pattern from the top now to the bottom of the network, and I think the reason why that's reassuring, as Wyatt says, is uh, it's not like we all got together at AutoCon and made this up. This is like a first principles thing that works, across all of software, like Wyatt said, and now we're finally getting to applying it down at the network level.
Yeah, and I'm excited that we now are getting the tools needed to do this. Like, talk to us a decade ago, we didn't have those tools available. We didn't have anyone in the industry that was trying to help us do things. They were trying to sell the product, right? They were trying to sell more switches, or they were trying to sell more of this or more of that. And there were some tools that would kind of do the thing, kind of document it, but man, it just wasn't made for us as network engineers. So, having tools like NetBox being able to create that source of truth and it be vendor agnostic, right? Like it doesn't matter what I have in my network, and I have a mess of stuff in my network. So being able to do that is amazing. And Itential is doing the same thing. We're trying to make things agnostic and trying to work with what you have. And there are some great tools out there now that allow us to do that.
I wanted to normally on this slide, I just skip past it. But since you're spending all day every day like over in this automation
Yeah.
cube on the right, I wondered if I could ask you to just share, some of the almost like how do people get started here? What do they hit? Like what does good look like? What have you learned?
Yeah. How do they get started? Let me start with that. About 15, man, time flies. About 15 years ago, I was presenting at a large web company. And it was doing a bunch of network engineers. And one of the questions was, how do I get paid more? And and the answer was obvious to me. And it was, if you can manage 10 switches, you can get paid X. If you can manage 100 switches, you can get paid 2X. And if you can manage 1,000 switches, you can get paid 3X. And if you can manage 10,000 switches, you can get paid 4X. And that's why the big guys at big companies get paid what they do, because they can manage a lot more switches for fewer people resources. And that's not a story that says that we're going to get fewer people, because man, we don't. We just get more devices. It's a story that if you want to get paid more, you're going to have to learn automation. And that's just all there was to it. So getting started, it's you want to get paid more. I want to make more money, right? So that's how you get started.
Right.
The other way to get started is how I got started, and that's because I'm lazy. And lazy is also efficient. And so to be efficient, you start writing scripts to do automation type of things. Um, but that only goes so far. That's a me concept. How do I do things better for myself? What happens in life is you're an individual contributor for a long time, and then you find out if you want to keep moving up in the world, you have to go into management, right? That's not always the case, but it is a lot the case. And so is the automation mentality. And that's this idea that I have to go from me, a concept of doing something for myself, to doing something for a team. How do I
Mm.
make my team do better? How do I create automations that let them do things? How do I create automations that allow tickets to be automated for others? So you've got this mentality of shifting from me to us and to everybody. Like it's a three-phase shift type of mentality that I'll introduce here. And this is all high level. We've got a high level picture. We're not going into details, but what you use to script, what you use to write those automations shouldn't matter. Do you want to use Ansible? Great. It's the tool of the day. 5 years ago, it was Chef or Puppet, right? You want to use Python? That's fantastic. Rust, Go, Golang, fantastic. We can have arguments on which one's the better automation tool, all we want, and they're fun arguments to have, right? Golang's my preferred methodology, just for the record, and I suck at Go as well. But that shouldn't be the ultimate question. The ultimate question should be, how do we take this blue line where it says operations, and how do we get it over to the network line, right? How do we make things move through automation seamlessly? And that is a big overviewing concept of how do I move from me to we to everybody.
Mm.
And as you do that, as you have that mind state, you start changing the way you do things, and you start looking for tools that help you to do that, which goes back to your source of truth, right? I can do it all myself on an Excel spreadsheet. Fantastic. I don't need NetBox if it's just me with my 10 routers. But as soon as I have another person involved, is he going to be able to understand my chicken scratching is on a piece of paper? Maybe. Now I have 3 people, right? Are they going to be able to understand it? No. Now we have to start using something like a source of truth. What happens when we get a large team and we want to share automations? Well, that becomes a question. And, today I go share an automation with Bob, and Bob sets it up on his laptop and he runs it and he forgets how to do it. And I go and I do some updates and install some things for him and make it work again. And he works on it for another couple of weeks and then he forgets again how to do that automation. And I finally get sick of him supporting Bob. And so I tell him to send me an email and I'm back to just doing the automations myself, right? I need a tool that can enable Bob. I need a tool that can enable other people. And by the way, I'm not saying anything that's new or exciting. What do you think AWS is? Like when I go try to start an EC2 instance or on the UI, or I want to deploy a VPC, I don't have a clue what's happening in the background. I honestly, I couldn't tell you. I don't know what switches are using, routers, anything. I just know I click a button that says go and it happens. And that's what we want to get to. And that's way down the road. That's a visionary type of talk for most of us, right? We're somewhere in between I'm going from 10 switches to 100 to 1,000 switches, or maybe I'm going from 1,000 switches to I need to enable my team, or maybe I am going from I need to enable my team to, man, we need to enable the entire organization. But somewhere along that path and that guide we're at, and we need to figure out how to get to that next step. So I don't know. I went off on 1,000 other things. Did that kind of explain the automation bucket over there?
That was presidential. I think it's a 3-way race over there right now. Like, I feel inspired. I want to jump on this train and come with you. It was amazing. And the 2 things that resonated. One is I love the me, we, everybody. I know we're going to come back to that one. But there was another little one in there, which you touched on really briefly, but I still hear it come up every now and again. It's like, is automation going to take our jobs? And I just spoke about how I've been through the automation cycle for my entire career. I've never seen it take a single job.
Yeah.
The point, like our network, are there going to be less networks in the future? Are they going to be smaller? Are they going to be less complex?
No. Have you seen the whole AI boom that we had? And that's just the latest one, right? Like the amount of network bandwidth is just increasing faster than we're increasing people. Like just that our jobs are definitely not going away. What we have to do to keep our jobs or to get paid more, that's a different question. But man, those jobs are not going anywhere. I don't care how much automation an Itential does or a Cisco does, or how much single button Apstra type of thing can deploy. It just does not get rid of the need to manage at scale.
What's kind of the problem we're talking about today? How people going through this great sort of call to action from Wyatt there around, I love that you started with the financial driver. Like, you want to get paid more? Maybe take a look at this. But now we're going to get a little bit more specific. And as we get towards looking at exactly what Torero does and how it helps. And, Wyatt was just talking about this, right? We've got a slide here that talks all about collaboration, right? It says scaling our automation efforts in a collaborative way is still painful. And I've got this classic like web meme up here, top right, like defect in production works on my machine. I actually lived this. Like my first, not actually my first job in a big company where I actually had to work with other people. I would create a C++ DLL or create a Java jar file, and I would literally email it to operations. And then
Oh, jar files are the worst, man. Oh, they were the worst. I think they've gotten better, but man, were they wouldn't work in, you know, minor version differences. They would mess up or your heap file or, oh my gosh, that was a mess.
it was a total mess. And the thing about it was I was basically throwing it over the wall.
Yeah.
Like collaboration was hard. We didn't this was just when CI/CD became really normal, build pipelines, all that kind of stuff. And it sucked. And really, it's the same kind of thing that's happening in networking today. Like to my point earlier, like you might be doing a lot of automation, but if that's 20 people doing their own automation, then at some point, you kind of just punting that you're punting that pain to the future. And that kind of comes to this top point here, like great beginnings turn into uphill battles. So uh, the advice, and it's correct advice, is start small.
Yep.
But I think
Absolutely.
what's tricky is when everyone starts small. And then
Yep.
suddenly you've got one thing that can read route tables and put them in a graph, and you've got one thing that can do something else and one thing that can do something else. I mean, you guys must see this all the time.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. See a ton of this. The little snowflake scripts that are out in the middle of nowhere that someone wrote and then they left for a better job. Good on them. And I don't have a clue what that script does or how it works or something like that. They started small and they needed to, and they did what they were supposed to be doing and made their job better and made them and scaled themselves for their company. But then they left, but then they needed to share it with someone or something like that. And you you nailed it on the head. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're doing up front, and you're going to have to go back in the back end and do some heavy lifting to make up for that.
Exactly. So that's why, and you'll start to see, why we chose this false summits idea, because I think a lot of the time, and this relates to the second point, is you've done your initial automation. It is an achievement, like well done.
Yep.
But like maybe people are super excited about it, and now you've got to break the news to them. Like it only works on my machine. The data is really limited. I don't really know how to extend it. Nobody else can use it. Like all these other things, and that like we were just talking about there being plenty of jobs to go around. But on this second skills shortage point, often what we see is people introducing. It's not like everybody's like gets up on a Monday and says, "Let's do automation." There's normally a lot of convincing going on, right? Somebody's had an idea and they want to carve out a bit of time to go and show promise, often evenings and weekends. And then
Yep.
they want to turn that like early result into more investment, like more help, more staff, more time, etc. And that's why this is tricky, because if you go show something and everyone's like, "Great, let's do more of it," and then it's a bad news story, that can be difficult to extend across the organization.
I've been on the vendor side for quite a while now, and I don't know how many times I have heard, I call it an excuse because it's my perspective, but the valid reason that they didn't have time to learn the new thing or to try out the new thing. And it's the skill shortage is not because we don't have the intelligence or drive. There's very few degree programs out there that get you to be a network engineer, right? So we all had to learn everything we did on our own. We got here on our own. So it's not that we don't want to go learn automation. We do. It sounds fantastic, right? It's that we don't have the time. It's that we're busy with the 100 different tickets that have come in that need us to change a port description or that's kind of minor, but need to make a route table update or need to do a firewall update. I would love to go automate that, but I can't because I'm busy. So
Mhm.
yeah, your nights and weekends are what you got to up your skill, or to get people that have that skill, right? Like those are your two options.
That's right. And I pulled out this if it hurts, do it more frequently bullet down the bottom, which I mentioned CI/CD, continuous integration and
Hmm.
continuous delivery earlier. This was the big sort of quote back then, which is, I want to say 2010, 2011, 2012, something like that. Back then in software, like I said earlier, the idea was um, like finish coding, throw a jar file over the wall to operations. Right now, from your perspective, you think you're done, but it's not done because customers aren't using that yet.
Yep.
And the idea was, let's bring more of that forwards, right? I want to be deploying all the time. Like the thing that currently sucks, let's make that part of how we work. And I think that's what a lot of people are seeing with automation in networks as well. As like, sure, if you go and make this script and you run it a few times, but you never really get to like touching production data, or you never really get to making sure that somebody else can use it, or you never like stick a front end on it so that somebody could like request something through it. Like you're moving in the right direction, but there are some like extra summits you still got to
This
get up.
this could be its own topic for debate or an AutoCon presentation in and of itself, and it is the mindset. And this is why we're slow, or at least a good excuse on why we're slow as networking engineers. If you break a server, you've broken your app, right? If you break a network piece, you've taken down the network, right? And so historically, we have been very, 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 very mindful of breaking things and very, very reluctant to move into faster scale. I think Facebook's networking motto is, I don't think it's network, I think it's their motto is go fast, break things. Something along those lines. I never worked at Facebook, but I've heard that. Um, and, and as a network engineer, you can't go to a bank and have that mentality, right? Like I can't do it. So yeah, when do I peak the summit of going in my dev or my staging environment and actually move into production? That's a hard question. And do I now lose my job because I did it more frequently and it hurt? How do I bridge that gap? That's a big question.
Well, actually, there's a great Zuckerberg quote that I used to use when I was at Equinix around this, because he did say, move fast and break things. 2010,
Okay.
2012, he said, move fast with stable infrastructure. No joke.
That's awesome. I hadn't heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, every
Yep.
time I remember that, I have to go and re-Google it again because it's just too good. But I believe that's true. Check at home if you want. But I think
Oh,
they found out, they found out.
that's fantastic. And that goes exactly to what we're saying right here, which is, man, yes, but that's hard to do. And how do you do that?
All right, let's keep on this a little bit because this next slide is I think it's kind of interesting. This is some more research from EMA from Seamus McGillicuddy, um, which basically points out that like it kind of brings together everything we've been seeing, but puts a bit of numbers on it. We say up here it's easy to get started but hard to follow through, and we see this in the numbers, right? 91% of organizations surveyed have budget for network automation. That's a huge leap from just a few years ago. 75% are
That's
planning to spend
huge.
even more. But 18% say that it's working, right? So
Yeah.
what we're seeing is like a ton of money flowing in, accelerating amount of money flowing in, and uh, not a ton of success yet.
I think there's some great detail there. And first of all, this is a fantastic stat. I love percentages because 82% of stats are made up, right? But this tells a story, and this story is very much in line with what Itential's trying to do and Torero's trying to do to help out. And that's this idea that like we want to make networks better. Like we're moving into it. We had an era of nah, don't worry about the networks. We're moving into the cloud, right? Like everyone moved to the cloud 5 years ago. I think these stats would have probably been half that because we would have been spending it all on moving into Amazon. And then we found out Amazon was expensive, right? We found out it was how much we were spending was orders of magnitude more. And I think we're now shifting back into let's make our network better, especially with AI driving and GPU. The amount of traffic, if you haven't started dealing with AI traffic, it's orders of magnitude more. And so how do we automate this, right? Like now it's time. Now the CIOs had a taste for EC2, they had a taste for AWS services, and they want that at home now. So how do we do that? I think Torero is a good step there, and I think Itential's also got really good help to get drive organizations in that direction.
We keep almost saying network as a service.
Oh
And
yeah.
I do want to talk about it, but I want to leave it for the end because I want to. We've made people wait long enough. I want to get to the stuff they can.
Let them wait a little bit longer. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. So, we've looked at super high level, most of the market's just getting started with this, a ton of money flowing into it. There are difficulties around automation, these instincts of, start fast, but also somehow be aware of what's ahead of you. This idea of collaboration being key to it. And now we want to look and switch this to where I think Wyatt's probably going to do more of the talking because we're going to kind of get to the main event.
Yeah. So this is great. I'm excited to tell you guys about Torero. Um, I like this first bullet heading, which is the automation gateway you didn't know you needed. At Mark, when this was first proposed to us, Peter Spergato was talking about it, and I was sitting there going, what are you trying to solve? Like, I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on or what you're trying to do. So, flash forward a few years later, we now have Torero, and the idea of an automation gateway is important. And let's take a step back and let's talk about other gateways that you may have heard of. So, have you heard of an API gateway, for instance?
Yes.
Yeah. So, an API gateway is essentially some sort of front end that gives you an API, and you don't know what's going on in the back end. It's doing a thing, and you're just presented with a front end set of services or catalog or line items that you can do to do the things you want to do. Does that sound familiar? That's also what you would get from like Amazon, right? Amazon's in the background doing 1,000 other things. Google, if you do a Google search, how many times have we heard how much traffic is generated from one Google search? I forget the number, but it's some exorbitant amount that's crazy. Google is just a gateway in front of a really large database. So what we've created and what we've designed is an automation gateway. It's something in front of your automations that allow users who don't know about your automations to use them. And this is huge. This is that moving from me to we concept.
Mhm.
How do I move from me? I've written my scripts, I've done my thing. How do I move it to a we specific type of thing? So the idea is transitioning from that local environment, my laptop, to a team-oriented environment. Let's put it on a server. Let's share it. Let's have access to it. Let's put controls around that access. How do we do all those things? Today, you can do it yourself. By the way, any application out there in the world, you can do yourself, right? Do we want to? Do we want to take the time to do it 99 times out of 100? No. If you're Google or Facebook, yeah, you probably are doing it yourself. They've built a lot of I'm doing it myself tools. This is that automation gateway. It's that front end that allows you to run all those scriptings that you want to do. Today, we support Ansible, OpenTofu, which is Terraform, or Python. Down the road, we're going to support any application. Like it's not going to be application specific. It's not going to be language specific. We're going to allow you to run any of those applications you create, any of those automations you create. And anytime interchanging application and automation, that's on purpose. It's because that mindset shift from consumer to producer. And it's that idea of I'm going from making an automation that I do a thing for myself to I'm creating an application. I'm creating something for other people I'm producing. And that's what Torero does. It's just a shim to help you take your automation to an application for others. Okay. So that's vague. That's high in the sky. I'll dive more into it here as we move on.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's keep going. I mean, I've got some questions, but let's flow into this one.
Okay. So let's take that previous high level picture you had and let's zoom in on the automation, right? Now we did it from a high level. You gave me time to just jabberjaw about how much money we do and don't make. And now I'm going to dive in technically to get a little more technical about it. Let's look at the right side. Maybe you want to write code, push it to that CI/CD pipeline you said, and then publish it to your Git repository. That's idealistic. Me, on the other hand, yes, I have written code, but I'm not a developer. I'm going to go find a script. I'm going to go make it work. And then I want to push it to my GitHub repo, right? Like I would love to build out a CI/CD pipeline for everything, but maybe I'm not there yet, right? We were talking on that scale of where you're at in your automation journey. You may not be there, but being able to create a structure around your automation, let's do the thing, let's put it and publish it somewhere, and then let's let others run that automation based on its publishing and based on what we tell them to do. So now we have this automation section. We've published our automations, and now we create, I'm going to call it a service catalog, but that might be too buzzwordy. I'm going to create a catalog of all my automations. I've got 2 automations, I've got 5 automations, I've got 10 automations. Maybe I've got 2 and Bob has 2. Maybe I'm a scripting crazy person. I love Ansible and I wrote 100 different things in Ansible and I've created 100 different things, 100 different automations using Ansible. I'm now publishing these as line items. I'll give a description on what it does. I'll give the variables that you have to give me. Maybe you need to give me an IP address and a subnet mask for a route. Maybe you have to give me a source and destination port if I'm doing an ACL update, whatever that is, but I give it as a line item. I don't tell them what the script is or how to run the script or what environment to put the script in. I no longer care what laptop they're running on because they're going to run this automation through this structured automation system. So
Mm.
that's Torero in a nutshell, is we've created this holistic system so that now you've got a service catalog to be able to offer to other people on your team, yourself. How many scripts do you run, you create, and you forget about? I've got a list of a dozen scripts on my own laptop that I've forgotten what I did because I did it 6 months ago. But if I still have it as a service, I can run it and I can just hit run and I can put in the variables. It might prompt me for variables I forgot I had to have, So, or in the case of today, what we'll show is we've got a Zabbix versus NetBox integration here. It's a script that's out there on the internet. It's published on GitHub. Let me pull that script down. Let me run it. And I'll set it and schedule it with a cron job or something to automatically sync the two systems together. That's easy. I found the script, I made it work, and now I've published it.
There's two sides to this. There's the producer and the consumer, but the consumer isn't the engineer anymore, right? The producer is, I'm going to go find a script, or I'm going to make my own, and I'm going to publish it in here in this. And then the interface is the service catalog, which, to your
Yes.
AWS point earlier, when you log into AWS and you click, I want a VPC, that's the service catalog you're dealing with those guys.
Yes, that's exactly. And you're right. You're pushing the consumer back to the operations team or back to maybe your team who doesn't know your script. You're pushing that consumer to be other people. Now you're a producer. I'm producing the script. However, I did it. I found it. I wrote it. CI/CD processed it. Whatever. It's now something I'm producing for other people to consume.
Well, one of the things that we see here is that the consumer is sometimes the end user. Where I did the last Network Automation Heroes episode that went out last night, I think, with Brian Ward from Dartmouth, and they've got this whole, they call it like service desk delegation. So let's say 100 tickets come into the NOC every day, but only 10 of them really need like a CCIE engineer to take a look at, right? Like 90 of them could just be done through some sort of template, right? Like you want to, I think the canonical example they use is you want to bring up an access switch port. So you need to pick a VLAN. Maybe you give it an IP or you just ask for an IP, and you need to do like admin state enable. That can be a form in the service catalog where the user can pick that and submit it, and either it gets sent to the networking team ready so that they can go, yeah, it looks good, and apply it. Or if it's really low impact, it can just be applied.
Yep, that's exactly the mindset. And at the end of the day, when all of this is said and done, 20 years down the road, and we've done everything we want to do, which is not going to happen, but let's pretend for a minute, that's what you want. You want the end user to be able to press the button to make it all happen. You want the AWS experience, right? And probably even AWS isn't the end of the experience because AWS also provides APIs for other people. AWS is also producing for other people that are producers, right? There's a if you want to go deploy a new application from application.com, it's going to go to AWS and it's going to deploy a new EC2 instance when their customers did something. So there's this hierarchy of creating a product for someone to consume, to create a product, to consume product. It can go on and on forever. So, in the dream world, all we're trying to do is we're trying to get the end user to be able to click the button to make it happen. We've got to bring it and narrow it back down to our world, which is automation.
Yeah.
How can we do that here? How can we do that in our automation world? And
Well,
Torero's the first time I've seen something doing that.
yeah, and I was sorry to cut you off. That was accidental. I was just about to say we've got a really specific example actually of this today that will appeal to NetBox users. So if you're a NetBox user, you will know that if you want to run things like automations, we have like a few different ways to do it. You can use custom scripts, which are great for some stuff. You can use plugins, way more powerful, but obviously a lot more difficult to create. You've got to be able to program, you've got to do things like that. And then, integrations that work with the API. And there's a ton of them out there, and they're like the easy mode because I don't have to create a GUI. I don't have to understand the NetBox object model, the ORM internally, right? I can just figure out the API on both sides of two tools and make my integration and publish it. And that's what a lot of generous people in our community do. They go ahead and they create these integrations. And the one that we're going to look at today is the Zabbix integration, which uses NetBox as an inventory to tell Zabbix what it should be monitoring. But, and it's such a, I'm glad it's worked out this way because it's such a perfect example. Like, let's say you go find this thing. How do you run it, right? It's kind of like it's out there and it's well maintained. Shout out to the maintainers. I'm going to put you in the show notes. But now I've got to download it. I've got to figure out where it's got to run. I've got to do all this kind of stuff, right? It's a perfect example for where something like Torero can bring this really useful code that in this case is shared with everybody because it's out there publicly on GitHub, but it's not necessarily easily usable by everybody in the me, we, everybody kind of idea.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll definitely do it as a demo and show it here in a second. But I took more time trying to figure out how to get Zabbix running and up and available than I did making this script work, right? Like the maintainers have it working, one simple command, couple of instructions, and it's off and running. And so, yeah, the script itself is pretty easy. Yeah, let's figure out how to make it something that my NOC team can go and press a button or schedule it, or something like that instead of having to even do that. Okay, so now, Mark, let's go through the demo. What I'll do is I'll start with what I did and how I started. So first, Mark, you put me in and told me about this and said, hey, let's make this script work or see what we can do to see if Torero can use it and how difficult it was. So I went over here, found the link to the GitHub link, and found these guys. Fantastic little script. Supposedly it works by synchronizing NetBox devices to Zabbix. And great. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to fork it. And I've already forked it ahead of time. I'm not going to do that process over again, but I forked it to my own repository. And that way I can create the config.py. All it needs is a config file. And in fact, yeah, I think I didn't even change the config file. I think I did the exact same config file. Let's see, config.py and config.py.example. Yeah, it's the exact same file. So you may need to make changes yourself, right? Your specific installation of NetBox and Zabbix may be different. So, but in my example, it was a straightforward, easy, no big deal. I just had to move it to config.py so that the script could recognize it was there. Okay, so I've forked my own repository. I've committed my files. Going back to that image, you've got the image of like, I found my script, I made my changes, and now I'm going to publish it to my Git repository. I've done those 3 steps. Now I want other users to be able to use this. I want it to be able to run on a cron job, run nightly. I want to manually run it after I've done a thing, something along those lines. But I don't want my users to have to go, git clone this and run it and change config files and stuff like that. So how do I do it myself? Well, Torero is a single command line, single application. It can be run in a server mode. It can be run in a client mode. I'm currently running it on my local device, but it can be run on a server without no problem. If I do a Torero get services, you can see that I've got that service catalog that I was talking about. I've got these different services, and it's actually kind of fun because I actually use this for myself. I wrote a script to deploy a 10-node Itential automation platform instance and a 3-node Itential automation platform instance. Those run in the cloud on EC2. I wrote that script 6 months ago. I wrote those scripts 6 months ago. I honestly could not tell you what I do to make those run. I know it has a couple of requirements, and there's a couple of things that it'll tell me I need. If I run Torero, run OpenTofu plan, apply, 10-node IP, I think this will tell me, yep, I need to provide it with an AWS access key and secret key. It tells me what the things I need to do to run it. I don't remember what it does, but if I wanted to deploy 10 nodes, and I do this all the time, I can do this by just running this command and giving it the values as needed. So back to Zabbix, I've created a service called N2Z. If we go look at this, my preferred way, you can do it via the command line, but my preferred way is to do it via a YAML file.
Hmm.
So real clean, real easy to see is I've got a repository I've created, and it points to my Zabbix fork that I did, right? Just point it to that repository. And then I create the service. Name's going to be N2Z. It's going to be a Python script. Give it a description. This is the file it's going to run. This is the repository it's going to use. And then I've got a couple of runtime environments that this script is requesting. It wants hosts and API tokens for each side, right? Makes sense. Straightforward. Okay. Once I have that, once I've written that, then it's really easy to say torero db import, and I'm going to import that file, torero.yaml. I've already imported it, so it's going to say it's going to skip it since it's already there. But in this case, it would, or in your case, it would added two new services or two new service file definitions to it, one for the repository and one for the service itself. Okay, now that I've done that, I can do a torero get services. I can see that it's there, and I can do a torero run Python service into, well, let's use let autocomplete fill it into Z. Great. And I run it, and it's going to run the script. That's it. Simple as that. It's going to give me the input and the output. I now have a service available that anyone can use. And yes, there are authentication. I can do a Torero login. I can deal with accounts, things like that. I'm in the wrong mode, but if I wasn't in a local mode, I could create usernames and passwords to do this. And now anytime I want to run that script, I can just run it. If I want to play this as a cron job, I can do that. If I want to give this to my customer or to my customers, to my other team members, I can do that. Or I can give it to myself for a prize for a later date, right? Because I'm going to forget how I set this up. I'm going to forget what I did. And now I have it available to just run because I know I need to run it. Now, did that actually work? Let's do something real quick and let's see that that actually did a thing. So if I go over here to Zabbix, do a refresh, I can see my hosts. I've got Spine 1 and I've got Ping a Switch that I made. If I go over to my NetBox devices, I've got my Ping a Switch and Spine 1. Great, those were there. I did that before the demo, so I cheated and I didn't really do it. Let's make a new one. Let's call this one Mark's device. Hey, I've already done Mark's device before. Let's do that again. Okay, it's going to be a part of the data center switches because I like Arista. We're going to say it's Arista 7150. 7150 is there at that site. And I'm going to create it. Now, I also need to make sure that it has an IP address that is usable. I hit the create button, right? Ah, there it goes. Okay, so now I'm going to have to add components to it. I'm going to have to give it an interface. Sorry, I'm doing everything on my laptop. So I've got Zabbix running, yeah. I've got WebEx running, and I've got NetBox running. So this isn't a, okay, well, Mark's device. We'll just call it 10 base TP, great. So we've now created Mark's device. Now we're going to add an IP address to it. We're going to say it's at, I don't know, doesn't matter, 10.0.0.1/32. And then now we have to go back to the component device and we have to make it that a primary IPv4. So this is so that it imports this as the IP address that it's going to connect to for monitoring purposes. So it pulls that, the script pulls the primary IP address here. So okay, I've done that. I now have Mark's device. It's a Arista 7150 and 10.0.0.1/32. Go over here, nothing's happened because we haven't run that synchronization script, but you may run this, like I'm doing it manually, or you can do it on some cron job to happen in a certain period in time. What this is doing is it is pulling the script from the repository. It's creating a virtual environment around it. It's running that script in that virtual environment and then getting rid of that virtual environment. So it's doing a whole slew of steps and processes so that you don't have to do all those steps yourself. Okay, now I've run that and supposedly, sure enough, Mark's device, we have it right here. Its interface is the 10.0.0.1. Voila, we're done. So now we're doing exactly on that storyboard you have, right? We have an operations, we have an intent that is put in NetBox and is running an automation that then goes and puts it in the network, or in this case, it puts it in Zabbix, and Zabbix then shows that intent as a real tool, it's a real piece, so the operations can have it.
This is cool demo for a number of reasons. Like, I'll start with the ones that are less obvious. What people see very often when they don't have intent-based network automation is that making a change to the network is really tricky, because you got to go and create a change window. You got to tell the monitoring team, please switch these things off, because all the alarms are going to go, because I'm going to be touching this machine. You've got to do a ton of different stuff. In this model, you update NetBox, you show NetBox to your colleagues, you say, does this look about right? These days, you can do that in a branch so that it's not even merged yet. Then when you've applied the automation, you can also automatically update the monitoring. So now you're not getting all these false alerts. You're not worried about coordinating with the teams and everything else. Second reason why it's really cool, we already covered these, is we just took a GitHub repo that someone's spending a bunch of time, big shout out to Tuan K, maintaining, and made it immediately usable by anybody who can use a CLI, right? You don't need to really know that much about Git. Maybe you got to check in one file, but it's taken that kind of value and made it accessible to many more people and more easily. And then on top of that, you've got all this workflow stuff. And I think you touched on one little thing there, which I wanted to touch on a little bit more, is you showed like log in, log out.
Yeah. Yep.
Now that kind of seems basic when it's just like a single player mode. But I think the value here is that you can have your entire team authenticated against different scripts that they're able to run through Torero. So now it's becoming like a multiplayer automation scenario.
Yeah, that's exactly. And the whole goal of, being able to share those automations is, I don't want to create a whole new infrastructure to be able to manage other people or anything like that. I want a tool that provides that type of service available. So Torero has the user authentication to be able to log in, log out, and not some random Joe can go run the scripts, but anyone that you've given authentication to can. And that is a big deal. As you start going from me to we, you now have to start caring about things like security and ACLs and who has access and who doesn't.
That's awesome. I love a good demo.
And it worked.
And somebody made the correct offerings to the gods. That's right. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So you've seen a whole bunch of information today. We started at a really high level with how it's definitely the right thing to do to just get started. Get started today with network automation, but be careful that you have the right sort of definition of done, right? You might think you're done, but there's a lot more to do. We've seen how Torero can help take all this scripting that you're starting with and make it, I love this, me, we, everybody, like, can make it accessible to the rest of the team, can make it secure, can mean that you can play multiplayer network automation all out of the box. It means you can also focus on just creating scripts, and something like Torero takes care of making sure that they all get run somewhere. Incredible stuff. I wanted to ask a couple kind of follow-up questions that we didn't have time for when we're going through the rest of it, because one of the things that jumped out to me, Wyatt, was, I wonder if once you've got this almost like central portal gateway interface for all these scripts, it also acts as a place for people to sort of enforce standards around the scripts. Like, we saw an example of the script asking for like telling you which input variables it needs. I wonder if that's a theme, that once you have this in place, you can start saying, in order for this to be like a certified script, you got to have X, Y, and Z, and that's a way to raise the standards.
Yeah, Torero is just trying to solve a very small piece of the pie, but it is enforcing a standard. And that standard is absolutely I now have users. I now have a Git location that I'm publishing things to. If you want to do your own crazy stuff that doesn't involve standards beyond that, for sure, go for it. That's the point, is that you can do what you want. That's scripting in a nutshell, so you can do what you want. But like you said, as you're moving forward from that me to us to we, or from me to we to everyone mentality, you'll find that there are more standards you got to put in place. And you can spend time doing the design phase that I prefer to do. I would prefer to sit and design a network and design standards than I would to be solving a trouble ticket or updating an ACL. And that's exactly the point, is that this allows you to spend time on those standards and creating a better standardization for your team. And uh, we all are we all dream about getting away from SSHing and logging into a box, right? That's the big deal. We all want to get off it. And this is the tool that gets you towards that place. One of them.
I think what it also does is it sets you up for, I mean, in order to use this, as we saw, there's this really simple step where you got to push it up to GitHub. Once it's in GitHub, you have that whole ecosystem that you can now start experimenting with. So we spoke about pipelines earlier. Like maybe when you push it, it kicks off GitHub Actions, which goes and lints the code and checks things and everything else. So it's starting to make each of the steps a little bit easier to get better at.
It's funny because this Torero has only been out for about 6 months now, as of today, or as of this video. But internally, as we start using it, we're finding places where it's like, oh, that was nice and easy. I use somebody's script and I say, hey, this isn't doing exactly what I thought it would be doing, right? And instead of them saying, okay, let's share a session, let's share a screen, let's look at the thing, I get a Slack message 30 minutes, an hour, 2 days later, whatever time it takes them to look at it, and they say, try it again. I just run the command. What happened in the background is he went to his GitHub repository, he pulled it down, he ran it himself. He was able to repeat the bug. He went and made changes. He fixed it in his dev environment. He tested it in staging. He then published it. And me as the user, I didn't see any of that. I just ran it again. I just hit run. That's it. And it's amazing when you start putting these things in place, how much easier and better it makes your world.
Well, I hope that this is starting. I've got definitely one more thing I want to ask you about, but maybe I said earlier, this network as a service term that's coming up quite a lot.
Yep,
and the way that I've understood that is, at a high level, is like make your on-prem networks feel like AWS, right? For all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly the kind of interaction Wyatt's talking about here. Like somebody else went and did a bunch of stuff, and now I have a different interface, which is just like whenever, Amazon are updating their services.
Yeah, that's as a network engineer, I can't solve that for them. I can make a network automation, I can deploy a network tool, a feature. I'm never going to create network as a service because that is 3 steps beyond me as a network engineer. If I move to an automation engineer, then sure, I can start to get to some level where I might produce APIs for somebody and I might have to manage that stuff and whole 9 yards. But then, you have this whole level of orchestration. We didn't even talk about that concept of word of like, I need to pull something from over here. I need to run something over there. I need to connect to this over here. And that's a whole nother level of intensity that as you grow from, and I'm now talking about how I'm moving from we to everyone, right? And network as a service is in that everyone's category mentally. And that is now a whole new level of like, how do I orchestrate things together? How do I create applications? How do I actually make the applications for the end user? And I'm not talking about, a DMG for Mac OS. I'm talking about something that can be created like an EC2 where I click a button and it does a thing, but it does a whole slew of things. It's a product. And so, yeah, to your point, there is a whole growth to get that network as a service concept. And Torero is that first step for you as a network engineer to not have to put much effort in to be able to go from that me to we to get to that stage to get towards that network as a service concept. I'm not saying you're there. I'm not saying that, we've hit some golden world of that's now networking as a service and Torero is forefront in making networking as a service for you. Anyone that says that is lying or selling you something, don't buy it from them. But because that is a huge process to undertake, but this is a step for you.
A step in the right direction. And I'm sure a bunch of people are going to watch this. Normally we get many, 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 many viewers and go and check out Torero. Is there, if you can share, where's Torero going next? What can people look forward to?
So coming shortly, we're going to create the commercial product around Torero. And I don't want to pitch it or sell it too much, but I've given you the idea of how to go from me to my team, but taking this Torero piece and being able to integrate it into that everyone mentality there's an integration piece there that's missing. And we as Itential are building out that piece. It's going to be a pretty web UI so that users can click and run the tool themselves, or they can integrate it into a larger orchestration or something along those lines. So again, no one's creating that network as a service, but we're really trying to help you guys get there.
Well, that's very exciting. And I don't know what the timing is around that stuff exactly, but what I do know is if you want to talk to us in person, well, I don't know if are you going to AutoCon, Wyatt?
I am, absolutely. I'm a
There
huge
we
fan of
go.
AutoCon.
So NetBox Labs team and the Itential Torero team will be at AutoCon. I think we're going to do some fun demos at the booth. You can come and hang out with us. We're having a social on the Wednesday night, so you can come and meet us in person if you would like to and ask us any questions. I think it's free drinks. So if that's not enough to get you there, I don't know what is.
That's all you need.
Well,
So yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys at AutoCon. Come find us, say hi to us. I'll definitely be there. I'll be at the booth. I'll be walking around. So definitely come shake hands with both of us.
all right. Well, thank you to everybody at home who's been watching. And Wyatt, a huge thank you. It's just an awesome presentation. Really
Thank
enjoyed
you
it.
very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for inviting us and having us on.